My Hero Academia Season 6's War Arc is almost reaching its climax and conclusion, so here are some takeaways and thoughts that we have on the most recent episode, The Ones Within Us, where Deku does have his biggest rage moment in the series thus far. The episode starts off with us seeing some of the stuff that we saw last week, with Deku approaching Shigaraki with a very strong punch, and Bakugo launching Endeavor at Shigaraki to have Endeavor do a plus ultra prominence burn to burn Shigaraki down to the cells and try to take him out that way. But what we saw last week was that All For One actually ended up taking over Shigaraki's body, which is a new thing that we have to worry about in the anime after the quirk surgery where Shigaraki was given All For One. Due to the presence of All For One inside of Shigaraki's body and all the kind of strange stuff that the Doctor and All For One have done to Shigaraki, now he's gonna have to be trying to fight for control in his own body against All For One, who's finally showing his true cards. And in this episode, we see All For One probably the most honest that he's ever been in the series, right? Because he's very blatant about the fact that he's using Shigaraki here, and that he knows that Shigaraki hates him for what he ended up doing to Shigaraki by taking control over his body and all the things that he did, because Shigaraki doesn't want to become the next All For One, right? But All For One very much in this episode is showing us why he's one of the biggest villains in the series or in the history of My Hero Academia. But we'll get back to All For One in a second, because this episode starts off with a very different scene, right? At the end of last episode, we saw Bakugo launching himself towards Deku to knock him out of the way of an attack coming in from Shigaraki, because Bakugo's body pretty much moved on its own in a very Deku-like way to save his friend. Now, Bakugo warns Deku that, hey, you're trying to do all this stuff alone still, and that's not really what we all agreed on here. Stop trying to do everything by yourself. And then Shigaraki, or All For One, I suppose, in Shigaraki's body, starts talking about how useless all the bloodshed that has happened in this war arc has been, right? More or less saying like, hey, all of this is pointless. You guys should just give up to me. And especially that last little bit of bloodshed that just happened right now with, you know, Bakugo and the teachers and everything. That didn't need to happen. You guys just suck. You're all kind of just getting killed and injured and maimed by me for absolutely no reason. Like, at the end of the day, I'm probably going to win here. So just give up now. And that, in the face of what just happened to Bakugo, drives Deku absolutely crazy, right? He remembers the Black Whip quirk user saying, hey, if you use this power in anger, it'll really start working for you, but you have to control your heart. And that flashes in Deku's mind while Black Whip starts to gather around his body and gather around his face, and Deku goes absolutely nuts. With dark energy and shadows all over his face, his eyes wide open. I mean, it looks really good from an artistic screenshot, and we also see a yellow sort of lightning bolt coming into the frame in Deku's face. A lot of people are like, what's that? Especially if you're anime only, and we will talk about that a little later on in the video to get into some manga details about what that little yellow lightning bolt on Deku's face is. But moving on of the episode, we see probably the best animated section of the episode, and something that honestly needed to be animated, well, Deku's rage moment, but it just feels too short for me, and it's sad. I want it to go on longer. I know it's a really short moment with Deku speeding through the sky to get to Shigaraki, so clearly they couldn't have taken that long with it, because it would have hampered kind of the aspect of speed that is at play there in that scene. But I will say that this episode's art direction is just really good. I mean, even the scenes with like Shigaraki looking all gruesome, or Shigaraki's face splitting open, like, things did just look very good in this episode. And that's probably because, like I found out a little earlier today, this episode was actually done by the team over at Bones Studio B. Now, if you don't know, Bones is split into different studios, and those different studios within Bones handle different anime. Now, if you've ever seen Mob Psycho, you know that that show consistently looks really good, and this episode of My Hero Academia, even though it's not animated the most and there's not that much movement really in some of the sections of the episode, it does still look very great because some of the people who are working on the episode. For a more detailed list, you can check the description for a link below. But Deku snaps at Shigaraki and goes full force forward, and then we see Shigaraki's face split open with a vision of All For One kind of lingering in behind it. And again, everything just looks so great here. And then from there, we get the moment that everyone has been avoiding in this arc, with All For One Shigaraki finally getting his his hand on Deku using All For One and stealing the quirk One For All. Or at least that's what was supposed to happen. You see, what ended up actually happening is Deku and Shigaraki were both sent into the Vestige World for a Vestige World tug of war. Pretty much a tug of war between One For All and All For One, where All For One is trying to pull in the One For All quirk, and the One For All users, i.e. Deku and the previous users, are trying to keep it from getting pulled in. Now, I've theorized, honestly, that I think in this tug of war, it is actually possible for the One For All quirks to pull back and actually maybe even pull All For One into One For All somehow, because this is a very, very strange interaction between two very similar yet opposite quirks. But we see Deku panicking inside the Vestige World and seeing All For One and Shigaraki's weird kind of amalgamation form. And then for the first time over the course of the series, we see Nana Shimura in the current day, because Nana Shimura is actually there talking to Deku from within the Vestige World. And I really, really like this section, right? Because even though this isn't the All For One that we've seen throughout the entire story, this is the All For One quirk kind of personifying itself as a person and enforcing All For One's will on Shigaraki. I like the fact that that version of All For One gets to talk to Deku's version of Nana Shimura, seeing as All For One is the one that took down all these quirk users and Shigaraki is there. And this is just a very complicated situation between All For One, Nana Shimura, Tenko or Shigaraki, and now Deku, who's kind of found his way in this now generations long battle between families. All For One gives us some of the first actual information that we've ever gotten on his character in earnest, saying that sometimes he has dreams where the original users of quirks that he's stolen come to haunt him, or disparage him and pretty much try to scare him. And they're nightmares, right? Where people come back and they're like, hey, you villain, you'll never get away with what you're doing with my quirk. You know, you're wrong for what you're doing, All For One. And I'm sure whereas those would be nightmares for the average person, they're probably pleasant dreams for All For One, where he's like, yeah, I have your quirk. Me. I forgot about even having this one. Thanks for reminding me. Now I can go destroy a village or something. Me. But I really got to hand it to the voice acting and everything in the scene. I think All For One was handled very, very well, and it does set up the level of threat that he has going forward in the series, and that's going to be especially important for the next upcoming arc, where All For One definitely has a role to play against Deku. All For One explains that quirks, when they're transferred to another people, are just like organs, wherein they have some sort of memory, right, that can affect the person's personality that they're going to and change various things. And during this big speech that All For One is giving, we actually see that Shigaraki is having a little bit of a moment here, right? Because he's finally faced with Nana Shimura after all the times where she's kind of been like an icon in his head or appeared here and there. We remember that back when Tenko was young, he had the picture of Nana, and that is what he kind of idolized as the reason that he wanted to be a hero, or at least the hope that he could be a hero, despite the fact that everyone told him no. Ironically, everyone in Shigaraki's house denied his dream, but just that photo of Nana Shimura gave Shigaraki hope, right? It was the only thing that didn't deny his dream and made it seem like his dream would be possible. So in a world where Shigaraki feels like everybody and everything denied him, and his only way of moving forward was by listening to All For One, because All For One pretty much gave Shigaraki his only option, right, which was to become a villain. We're faced with this situation where Shigaraki now looks over at Nana and he's like, hey, no matter what happened, I hate you, right? Because I'm already on this road for where I think I want to be, right? The only option that was open to me, I've taken it, and now I'm not going to let you come back to me and say, hey, no, actually be a hero. Never mind, don't be a villain. You guys have denied me every step of the way, and now that I finally have what I want, at least what he thinks he wants, thanks to All For One, no one's going to stop me from completing my road down this path. And it's really sad because a lot of times throughout the series, we get reminded that it probably would have been possible for Shigaraki to be a hero if it wasn't for All For One's existence, period, right? The one that Shigaraki really has to blame more than anything actually is All For One the most, because the reason that Nana Shimura even gave up Kotaro and had Tenko end up in the situation that he ended up in was because she was trying to keep her family safe from All For One in the first place. And it wasn't until All For One then went and twisted that love into his own ends that Shigaraki was presented with the situation that he ended up in that made him into a villain. And in this episode, it really seems as if Deku has started to pick up on that, at least from seeing the visual of All For One more or less gagging Shigaraki, right? Keeping him from being able to breathe save with the weird body melding that is going on. And I'm sure for Deku, that echoes back to the original episode of My Hero Academia, where we see Deku attempting to save Bakugo from the sludge monster, right? And that's very much what I think Horikoshi is trying to kind of visualize here. In the beginning of My Hero Academia, we see Bakugo, who's this character who doesn't want anyone's help, right? He has his very own methods for how to get to where he wants to be and his very own vision for what he wants to be, right? And no one can say anything to him. He doesn't want help from anyone. And then you have this dark source that comes up to him and is like, hey, you have all this power, you have all this ability. If I take over your body, I'll be able to do anything, even take down All Might, right? And then as the villain rampages, we see that in the center of that, Bakugo is actually choking, right? Barely able to breathe with his body being taken over, unable to act until someone actually saves him, despite the fact that Bakugo is not the kind of character who would ever ask for help, right? He would never ask anybody for help, especially the way that he was in the beginning of the series. But if Deku or somebody didn't step in to save Bakugo in that moment, he probably would have suffocated and died. And I think Deku very much sees the same situation here of Shigaraki because of All For One kind of forcing him to do all these things. That's not to say that Shigaraki is just naturally a good person, but you can see the clear and obvious parallels between Shigaraki's situation in this episode and Bakugo's situation in the first episodes of My Hero Academia, and why that then caused Deku to move the way that he did towards Shigaraki and All For One, with the One For All user saying that Deku is the kind of person who saves others beyond reasoning, right? Like, it doesn't even make sense, the kind of drive that he has to save others, but because of that, One For All has finally found its true purpose, and One For All itself, the quirk, and all the previous users, or kind of all of them, we're going to talk about that probably in a couple days, have decided to stick with Deku and stand by Deku, because the way that he uses One For All symbolizes everything that the quirk is meant to. We get out of the quirk tug of war of Deku and Shigaraki pretty much completely out of it, and Deku passing out actually, saying, hey Shigaraki, please don't move, I honestly don't think I have any more energy, and then completely falling asleep. So Deku is officially passed out on the battlefield. We're gonna see next week, I believe, what's going on with Shigaraki, or in the next episode preview, but from here, we cut away to another area with Gigantomachia tearing through Japan, making his way over to Shigaraki, carrying Dabi and the other League of Villains members on his back. Now, Dabi is very excited here because he actually has a big week coming up next week, and he says that he's ready to destroy this entire fake hero society, kind of getting really excited with Skeptic and telling him to do a couple things. And then we see a scene of Compress talking to Toga, kind of expanding on the manga material, where Toga was still sad over Twice's death, and she was still considering, you know, can heroes really understand me? Are there any heroes that'll really understand the kind of person that I am? And do heroes just want to kill villains? You know what I mean? Like, if a hero sees me, would they just kill me if they had to stop me? Or is there a person who is not going to cross that line, who is gonna, no matter what, try and save me? And I really like how this scene comes directly after the scene of One For All explaining that Deku is exactly that kind of person, because Ochako is more or less Toga's Deku, right? And it kind of provides some parallels for Ochako once Ochako gets her head on straight about the entire Toga situation. But we'll cut back to Ochako in a second here, because Toga eventually ends up seeing Ochako in the madness of all the buildings flying that Makia is just cutting through, watching him cut through skyscrapers and all sorts of crazy stuff, and she decides to head down to Ochako's area, giving us probably another one of the best animated sections of the episode, where she pretends to be, or I suppose transforms into an old lady, to get Ochako to come to a house and have a battle with her, where she can ask her the question that's been dying on her mind. And we get this actually really cool, creepy section of the episode where Ochako goes into a house and Toga's kind of just like in there, right? Hiding in the dark, hiding in the shadows. You have no idea where she is, but her voice echoes through the building. And I thought that was done really well. And I like how this episode was done by the mob team, and we get this really nice, creepy scene, because it just kind of makes sense, right? I feel like they did a really good job on that, especially considering that's already what they're used to. Toga jumps down at Ochako and asks her, what do you want to do with me? Specifically asking her, like, hey, do you want to kill me, Ochako? Is that what it is? Like, is that what our dynamic is? That at the end of the day, when we have these little battles back and forth, you're just thinking about the fact that you're gonna kill me at the end of this, right? And Ochako is blown back, right? Like, she's like, that's all, more or less? Like, you did all this just to ask me that stupid question, right? Like, you killed the old lady to get her blood, to transform into her just to ask me this dumb question? And honestly, I would give Toga the benefit of the doubt here, because I honestly don't think Toga killed the old lady to get her blood. Maybe that's just me, like, giving her the benefit of the doubt, but I think Toga did find some way to get the blood from that old lady without actually killing her, right? Or doing any sort of crazy damage to the old lady, especially considering that some of Toga's stuff is hypothermic, and the old lady might not have even noticed 100% blow is being taken from her. But this very much shows the way that Ochako is thinking of Toga here, right? That Ochako sees Toga as just another villain and immediately jumps to a conclusion of what she thinks Toga was capable of in this moment, and that hurts Toga's feelings because she's like, I get it. I get how you guys look at me, right? Like, I immediately understand you don't look at me as a person or as someone with their own problems or as someone who's only doing this for whatever reason. You just see me as a villain and see yourself as a hero and think like, because that's the roles that we play, that things have to go a certain way, and that's very, very disappointing, and we are going to see more of that next week as we pick up on the Ochako versus Toga section. For those of you who don't find that hyper exciting, keep in mind, next week is probably going to be one of the hypest episodes of the entire season. No matter how anything is animated besides one scene, it's going to be the best because it is Dabi's dance. Now, Dabi's dance is when Dabi comes into the story and gives us a bit of information that we've all been waiting to see him reveal. So look forward to the next episode of My Hero Academia next week. I wasn't all that happy with last week's episode, but I do think they kind of carried it through in this week. The animation wasn't incredible, but the art style and the actual art of the episode, I feel like carried it through along of the direction. So I really enjoyed this episode. It wasn't the best episode of the season, but it is definitely up there with one of the better episodes so far, or at least one of the better, a little more conservative episodes animation-wise. So that's my thought on the episode. I can't wait to see what you guys think next. And yeah, check out the channel for more videos coming later in the day. I've got shorts, I've got all sorts of stuff. Vocal Pineapple here, getting you guys brand new content as the season goes on. We're almost halfway through now, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. It's Pineapple again. Peace.